Welcome to Crazy Crime Podcast. Step into a world where the truth is stranger than fiction. Here at Crazy Crime Podcast, we uncover the most bizarre, unbelievable, and downright jaw-dropping crimes that make you wonder, did that really happen? From outrageous heists to mind-bending mysteries, these stories are so wild they seem made up, but they're all too real. Buckle up because we're diving into the unbelievable, the shocking, and the downright crazy. Grab your headphones and join us for a thrilling ride into the world of crimes too crazy to be true. Let's get started.
All right, let's dive into a case that is, it's pretty twisted and fascinating. We're looking at Amanda Chapin from Wisconsin, accused of trying to kill her husband. And he was a veterinarian, but not in the way you might think.
Yeah, so the weapon of choice is pretty intriguing. Animal euthanasia drugs definitely adds a layer of complexity you don't see every day.
Right. It's not exactly your typical murder mystery, is it? So our goal is to try to unravel this whole thing. How did a marriage go from I do to attempted murder in just a few short months? Let's start with the poisonings themselves. Between July and August 2022, she allegedly poisoned her husband Gary 3 separate times.
And each time she allegedly used pentobarbital, which is a powerful sedative that is used in animal euthanasia. It's a detail that raises a lot of questions, especially considering Gary's profession as a veterinarian.
Yeah, it's a bit unsettling. I know veterinarians work with these drugs all the time, but, to use them in this context, it's chilling. But let's go back for a second. Didn't Amanda and Gary get married just a few months before the first poisoning?
They did, yeah. The wedding was in March of 2022, and the first poisoning attempt was in July. So that short time frame definitely raises some red flags.
It seems like the clock starts ticking as soon as they say, I do. And then it gets even more suspicious when you consider what Amanda did right after the wedding. She forged the signature of one of Gary's children on a power of attorney document.
Yeah, and on top of that, she also pressured Gary into changing the deed on his house so that she would inherit it if he died.
Oh, wow. So it wasn't just about, getting rid of Gary. It was about making sure that she would benefit financially. It seems like it was less of a crime of passion and more like a carefully thought out plan.
Yeah, and especially given how she went about the poisonings. Pentobarbital is a very fast-acting drug, and typically it causes loss of consciousness within minutes.
And I'm guessing it wouldn't be easy to detect, right?
Yeah.
Unless they were specifically testing for it.
Exactly. Yeah. Without knowing what to look for, it could be easily missed, especially if somebody were to die, say, in their sleep. Thankfully, though, in Gary's case, doctors were able to identify the pentobarbital after he fell into a coma after the third poisoning. That's what ultimately led to Amanda's arrest.
So we have the poisonings, we have a quick marriage, we have some very questionable financial moves. It seems like Amanda was setting the stage for a very specific outcome here. So let's talk about what happened when this case went to court. She was initially charged with attempted first-degree intentional homicide, which is a pretty serious charge.
Very serious. That charge means that prosecutors believe that Amanda was deliberately trying to kill Gary. But things took a bit of an unexpected turn when she entered a plea of no contest to a lesser charge, first-degree recklessly endangering safety.
No contest. So that means she didn't admit guilt, but she's also not fighting the charges, so what's the difference?
Basically, a no contest plea means that she's acknowledging that the prosecution has enough evidence to convict her, but she's not admitting guilt. But for the purposes of sentencing, it is treated the same way as a guilty plea.
Interesting. So what kind of sentence were they looking at with this new charge?
Well, the prosecution was pushing for a 10-year sentence, split between 5 years in prison and 5 years of extended supervision. Their argument was that Amanda's actions showed a complete disregard for Gary's life and that she had put him in danger multiple times.
That seems pretty reasonable considering what happened. Did the defense try to counter that at all?
They did. Interestingly, they focused on Amanda's previous good deeds and her career in healthcare, painting her as someone who, had made a cerebral mistake but is otherwise a contributing member of society.
Wait a minute. So they were using her healthcare background as a defense, but didn't she use that knowledge to actually get the pentobarbital and carry out the poisonings?
It does seem counterintuitive, but they were basically arguing for leniency, suggesting that this was an isolated incident and not indicative of her true character. They went so far as to suggest maybe probation or minimal jail time.
So it sounds like they were trying to appeal to the judge's sense of compassion. So what did the judge ultimately decide?
In the end, the judge sentenced Amanda to 6 years. 3 years in custody and 3 years of supervised probation. So sort of a middle ground between what the prosecution and the defense were asking for.
6 years is still a significant amount of time. It seems like the judge really weighed the severity of the crime with her lack of criminal history. But this story doesn't end there, does it? There's the whole issue of the suicide note and the divorce.
Right, yeah. After the poisoning, Gary's son filed a restraining order against Amanda on his father's behalf to protect him from, further harm. But Amanda ended up violating that order by sending Gary a suicide note by email.
A suicide note? Why would she send a suicide note after everything that had happened?
Yeah, it's the content of the note that makes things really interesting. In it, she blamed Gary's children for her actions, claiming that they were turning him against her. And she also professed her undying love for him, despite, trying to poison him on multiple occasions.
Hold on, let me get this straight. She's blaming the children for trying to kill their father, but then also saying she's in love with him. It's hard to understand what she was trying to accomplish here.
It's definitely contradictory. Was it a genuine expression of remorse, or was it a way to manipulate Gary? It's a question that raises a lot of questions about her state of mind.
And did she actually attempt suicide after sending the note?
No. Luckily, she didn't. Paramedics were able to get to her in time, and she was taken to the hospital and recovered.
Okay, so what was Gary's reaction to all of this? I mean, this is his wife, the woman that he vowed to spend the rest of his life with.
His reaction was pretty clear. The very next day, he filed for divorce.
Wow. That speaks volumes, doesn't it? Despite her declarations of love, he was done. It makes you wonder what was going through his mind having to deal with all of this.
Yeah, for sure. It's a case full of twists and turns, and we can only speculate about what Gary was thinking and feeling.
Right, and this is really just the beginning. We've only scratched the surface of this case. But before we move on, is there anything else about this first part of the story that stands out to you?
I think what really stands out is the contrast between Amanda's outward actions and her, her true motivations. She was a healthcare professional, somebody who's supposed to be dedicated to helping others, but it seems like she had a much darker side.
Yeah, it really goes to show that you never know what's going on in someone else's mind. But let's not stop there. We still need to unpack the legal proceedings and try to understand what her motivation might have been.
You got it. There's a lot more to uncover in this deep dive. Let's see if we can figure out what drove Amanda to do what she did.
So we just went through a lot. Betrayal, attempted murder, and a suicide note that really doesn't make a lot of sense. But the courtroom drama, I feel like that's where things got even more intense.
Oh, absolutely. The legal proceedings in this case, I think they're really interesting, especially when you look at the back and forth between the defense and the prosecution.
Mm-hmm.
It definitely wasn't just a straightforward case.
Right. Okay, so let's back up a little bit. We know that Amanda was initially hit with that attempted first-degree intentional homicide charge, which, that's a heavy charge. That could have put her away for life, maybe?
Yeah. It indicates, premeditation.
Yeah.
It means that she had a plan to end Gary's life. But then, of course, it was reduced to first-degree recklessly endangering safety.
Yeah. And that's kind of a head-scratcher, right? Why would they reduce the charge? Was there just not enough evidence to prove the intent?
It's possible. Proving intent beyond a reasonable doubt is, it's difficult. And maybe the prosecution was worried that given the complexities of the case, you have the suicide note and there are definitely questions about Amanda's, her mental state, Maybe they were afraid that a jury wouldn't convict on that more serious charge.
Yeah. I guess sometimes it's better to get a conviction on a lesser charge than to risk losing altogether. But even with this reduced charge, they weren't letting her off easy. They wanted a 10-year sentence.
Right, and they had some pretty good arguments. They really focused on how serious what Amanda did was. That she poisoned him 3 separate times, that he was vulnerable, and of course, what this did to his family. I think they really wanted to make sure that the judge understood how bad the situation was.
So they were basically saying, okay, even if we can't prove she wanted to kill him, for sure her actions were still really dangerous and reckless, and she needs to be held accountable.
Right, exactly. They were sending a message. You can't do this and get away with it. But then, the defense came at it with a totally different approach.
Right, the good character defense.
Yeah.
Bringing up all of her past good deeds and her work as a nurse. As if to say this wasn't the real Amanda, this was a mistake, and she's actually a good person.
It's a very interesting strategy. trying to humanize her when she was accused of something so serious. It's like they're asking the judge to see the whole person and not just the crime.
But it feels kind of weird, right? I mean, she used her medical knowledge to get the drug and to carry out the poisonings. Like, shouldn't that work against her?
Right. Yeah. And the prosecution definitely brought that up, that her background actually made it worse because she knew what she was doing. She knew the risks. But ultimately, it was really up to the judge to consider everything and decide on a fair sentence.
So what happened? What did the judge end up doing?
Amanda was sentenced to 6 years, 3 years in custody, and then 3 years of supervised probation.
So it sounds like a compromise, right? Acknowledging that the crime was serious, but also that, maybe she could be rehabilitated. But it wasn't just about the time, right? I mean, the way she acted in court, that played a role too, didn't it?
Oh, absolutely. She had a chance to address the court, to maybe say she was sorry or explain herself. But instead of doing that, she did something pretty unexpected.
Oh, what was that?
She basically, she thanked people. She thanked God and her siblings and members of her church who had supported her, almost as if, she was a victim.
Wow. You think she would have taken that opportunity to, I don't know, show some remorse, apologize to Gary and his kids, try to, save face a little bit? It's almost like she was just trying to protect her image.
Yeah, that's a valid point. And it really didn't go over well, with people who were following the case. It just seemed like she didn't get it. She wasn't really taking responsibility for what she'd done or the pain that she'd caused.
Okay, so she's now serving her time and facing the consequences. But there's still that big question mark hanging over this whole thing, right? Why? Why did she do it? I mean, was it really just about the money? Or was there something else going on?
That's always the question, isn't it? It's what keeps us coming back to these cases. What makes a person do something like this? We can look at the evidence, but, we can never really know what's going on in someone else's mind.
And this is where it gets really interesting because that's where we get into the psychology behind the crime, right? Like, it's not just about the facts of the case. It's about, the dark side of the human mind.
Absolutely. We have to consider everything. I mean, maybe there's some psychological aspect that we don't know about or something that was going on in the relationship that, that pushed her to do something like this. Or maybe it was, just cold-hearted greed, like the prosecution said. These are the questions we'll try to answer in the next part of our deep dive.
So we've talked about a lot in this deep dive. We've got the poison, the marriage, the money, the suicide note. And that suicide note, well, it really left us with more questions than answers. But I think as we wrap things up here, we have to go back to that one big question: why? What would make somebody try to, to take their spouse's life?
It's the question that, just sits there with every case like this, isn't it? The human mind is a complicated thing. We look at the evidence, we can put together a timeline, but a lot of times we're never really sure.
Yeah, we can't get inside her head, and know exactly what she was thinking, but we can look at the evidence, look at what she did, and maybe get some idea of what was going on. What are some of the things that stand out to you?
Well, the money's a big one. I mean, everything she did, from forging that signature to changing the deed on the house, points to a plan to, to get money if Gary died. It shows that greed can be a very powerful motivator.
Yeah, it's like she was playing the long game, setting things up so that she would benefit. But is money enough to explain, attempted murder? I mean, it's pretty extreme.
That's what makes you wonder, right? Was there something else going on too? Were there problems in the relationship that we don't know about? Or maybe there's some psychological thing that we're missing. People aren't always straightforward.
The suicide note definitely makes things even more complicated. She blames the kids and then says she loves Gary. I mean, how do you make sense of that? It just doesn't add up with what she did.
It's confusing, for sure. You could see it as her trying to, to manipulate Gary, maybe make herself look like the victim, or maybe it shows that she was just, not thinking straight, trying to make sense of what she had done. It shows how, love and obsession and desperation can get all mixed up.
Yeah, it's like we're just getting these little glimpses, like through a crack in a window, and that's what makes this whole thing so disturbing. We're left with all these unanswered questions, these little peeks into the dark side of people.
Right. It reminds us that even in normal, everyday relationships, things can be going on that you don't see, things that are complicated, things that don't make sense. You just never really know what's happening with other people, even the people you're close to.
Yeah, and it makes you realize how important it is to pay attention to those, to those red flags, to trust your gut, to remember that, well, sometimes the people we think we know can surprise us.
This deep dive has taken us to a dark place. It's a story about betrayal and greed and how easy it is to break trust. But it's also a story about, being strong. Gary survived. And even though I'm sure this whole thing was incredibly hard on him, he's going on with his life.
And for everybody listening, maybe this is a reminder to, I don't know, to appreciate the good people in your lives. Be careful, and never forget how complicated people can be.
We might never know for sure why Amanda did what she did. But sometimes I think maybe the question itself is more important. It makes you think about love and trust and how we make choices, even when things are bad.
That's a good point. And with that, I think we'll wrap up this deep dive. It's been a tough one, but hopefully it's given you something to think about. Until next time, keep on exploring, keep asking questions, and keep diving deep.